What goes through the mind of a child or teenager when he or she commits a crime so horrific that it changes the lives of his or her family forever? When children or teenagers who should be protected become the ones responsible for family tragedies? In cases like these, the line between guilt and compassion is blurred, and the question that remains is, how much responsibility does a child or teenager have for his or her actions? This is a portrait of young people who, in moments of anger, frustration or outside influence, made fatal decisions and now face the harsh reality of life in prison. How do these children and teenagers react to the sentence? Can the weight of life in prison really pay for the pain they have caused their families? We will explore real stories of children and teenagers who, in an impulsive act, destroyed their own families and their lives forever. Roxana Sikorsky, just 15 years old, sat in the dock to face the consequences of a crime that shocked Plymouth, in the United States. She was being tried as an adult for planning and attempting to carry out an attack against her own family, influenced by her boyfriend, Michael Rivera, 23 years old. It all started on the night of October 17, 2014. Michael Rivera stood outside the Sikorsky family home, sending text messages with instructions to Roxana. Following the plan, the young woman grabbed a knife and went to the room of her younger brother, Lucas, just 12 years old. She brutally attacked him, but despite being seriously injured, Lucas managed to escape and call for help. Roxana then tried to attack her older sister, Angelica, but was unsuccessful. Realizing that the plan was failing, she fled to Rivera's house, where she was found by the police a few hours later. During questioning, she confessed everything: the attack, Rivera's influence, and their plan to run away together and get married. The police found compelling evidence, including text messages exchanged between the two, which made it clear that the crime had been carefully planned. In court, prosecutors emphasized the gravity of Roxana's actions. They described how she acted coldly, following Rivera's instructions to attack her own family. The evidence, such as the messages and the victims' testimonies, was irrefutable. For prosecutors, this was not just a case of teenage rebellion, but a premeditated and cruel crime, justifying the decision to try her as an adult. The defense, on the other hand, tried to bring a more human side to the story. The lawyers argued that Roxana was a vulnerable young woman with a history of emotional problems, including attention deficit disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. They claimed that she was manipulated by Rivera, an older man who used his influence to alienate her from her family and force her to make extreme decisions. Roxana's adoptive parents also testified. Despite their pain, they insisted that their daughter needed help, not just punishment. They believed that Roxana's emotional problems, combined with Rivera's influence, were the true catalysts for the crime. The most dramatic moment of the trial came during the sentencing. Roxana was shaking and crying as the judge reviewed the details of the case. When given the opportunity to speak, she apologized to her family, saying through tears, "I promise that I will get better no matter what happens, and that I will see Lucas and Angelica again. I am so sorry." Despite her words of regret, the judge stressed that the gravity of the crime could not be ignored. He stated that while her age and vulnerabilities were taken into account, Roxana's actions and the risk she posed to others warranted severe punishment. The sentence was up to 20 years in prison, while Rivera was also convicted for his role in the scheme. The courtroom sat in silence as Roxana was escorted out. The community was divided. Some believed the sentence was fair and necessary, while others felt that her age and Rivera's manipulation should have been more considered. This case is not just about crime, but about the complexity of human relationships and the consequences of toxic influences. Roxana, now facing years in prison, is a reminder of how impulsive choices can have devastating results, not only for the person who makes them, but for everyone around her. Will the conviction truly rehabilitate Roxana? Or do cases like this always leave wounds that never heal? Regardless of the answer, the impact of this case still resonates, serving as a warning about the dangers of manipulation and thoughtless decisions. Before we continue with the video, why not take the opportunity to check if you are already subscribed? No channel. Here, we bring real and impactful stories about crimes that marked the story, exploring details you can't find anywhere. If you like this type of content and I don't want to miss any of these fascinating narratives, sign up right now. Your participation is essential for us to continue bringing more intriguing cases. And of course, thank you very much for being part of this journey with us. Imagine a 14-year-old boy sitting in a courtroom and being told that he will spend the next decades of his life in prison. Not for a silly mistake, or for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but for something that shocked the entire community, the brutal murder of his own grandmother. This is the case of Antonio Barbo, a teenager who, in 2013, committed one of the most disturbing crimes ever recorded in his city. It all started when Antonio and his friend Nathan Pop decided to steal money from Antonio's grandmother, Barbara Wilson, 78 years old. Barbara, as always, was kind. She opened the door of her house to the two boys, without imagining that they were planning something terrible. She was known for being a kind and welcoming woman who loved her family and never hesitated to help anyone in need. But inside the house, the boys' plan took a horrific turn. They attacked Barbara with an axe and a hammer, causing fatal injuries. The crime scene was described as extremely brutal, shocking even experienced investigators. Now, stop and think, two teenage boys, committing something so cruel. How could this happen? It's a question that everyone asked at the time, and it's still hard to answer. The trial was one of the most tense moments of this case. The courtroom was full. Barbara's family, journalists and community members were there, waiting to see how justice would deal with such a tragic crime. Antonio, small and visibly shaken, was sitting next to his lawyer. When it was time to give his statement, the room fell into complete silence. He held a piece of paper with his words written on it, but soon his voice began to falter. He could barely read the first sentence before he began to cry. Tears interrupted his attempt to speak, and his lawyer had to intervene, taking the paper and continuing to read. Antonio's words were full of regret, but they also revealed deep confusion. It seemed that not even he fully understood what he had done. Even the lawyer, who was used to dealing with difficult situations, had difficulty maintaining his composure as he read the young man's statement. Judge Timothy Van Akkeren, with over 24 years of experience, said it was one of the most disturbing crimes he had ever tried. He described the murder as brutal and merciless, noting that Barbara had trusted Antonio, only to be betrayed in such a cruel way. Despite the young man's age, the gravity of the crime could not be ignored. Antonio was sentenced to 36 years in prison, the minimum sentence allowed for such a heinous crime. The judge was clear, the punishment was not only about justice, but also about sending a message that such brutal acts could not be tolerated. As the sentence was read, Antonio stood still, with his head bowed. There were no protests, no screams, only the sound of the judge's gavel closing the case. If you were there, you would have probably felt the weight of that silence. Even those who were there simply to follow the trial were shocked. For Barbara's family, the pain was unbearable. During the trial, her family described Barbara as a loving, vibrant woman who always put others before herself. Losing someone like that would be devastating enough under any circumstances, but knowing that the person responsible was her own grandson made it even harder to bear. The community was also deeply shaken. This case sparked debate about youth violence and what drives teenagers to commit such extreme crimes. Many people asked, how could something so terrible happen within a family? Cases like this make us reflect on the fragility of family bonds and how the unexpected can happen where we least expect it. And sometimes the simplest questions, like, why, are the hardest to answer. As Antonio serves his long sentence, Barbara Wilson's memory lives on in the memories of those who loved her. The impact of this crime goes far beyond the walls of a courtroom or the length of a sentence. It is a reminder of how fatal choices can destroy lives, not just of the victim, but also of the perpetrator and everyone around them. Can justice really repair what was lost? Or do cases like this always leave wounds that never heal? Nehemiah Griego, just 15 years old, committed one of the most disturbing crimes ever recorded in New Mexico. In 2013, he murdered his mother, his 3 younger brothers, and finally his father. But what has drawn the most attention in this brutal case is what happened next, the trial, marked by tension, remorse, and decisions that would divide opinions. The massacre began inside the Griego family home. Nehemiah shot his 40-year-old mother to death, claiming frustration with her. He then murdered his 9-year-old brother and his 2 younger sisters, ages 5 and 2. After that, he patiently waited for his father, Greg Griego, a respected community leader, to arrive and killed him as well. After committing these horrific acts, Nehemiah left the crime scene and went to a local church before being arrested. Imagine the cold-bloodedness it would take for someone to do that and then calmly sit in a church pew. It is a detail that makes the case even more difficult to understand. During questioning, he confessed to the crime without showing much emotion. He claimed that he was frustrated with his mother and that he felt suicidal, but authorities quickly concluded that these reasons were not sufficient to explain such brutality. The trial was divided into 2 stages. First, he was tried as a juvenile, but due to the gravity of the case, the prosecution insisted that he be tried as an adult. It was during this second trial that emotions in the courtroom reached their peak. The prosecutors presented shocking evidence, including statements from investigators at the crime scene. They described in detail the cold-bloodedness with which Nehemiah killed his family, calmly waiting to kill his father. To them, the planning and execution of the crime showed a level of premeditation unusual for someone his age. On the other hand, the defense tried to argue that Nehemiah was an emotionally unstable teenager. They cited his suicidal behavior and claimed that he needed help, not just punishment. Despite these arguments, the evidence against him was overwhelming. The most shocking moment came when Nehemiah first showed signs of remorse. During the hearing, he faced his surviving family members and apologized. He appeared shaken, his words expressing regret. "I am sorry for what I did. I can never undo what happened." But here comes a difficult question: is remorse enough when what was lost can never be recovered? The prosecutor, who seemed deeply affected by the case, made it clear that the apology did not erase the gravity of the crime. He said, "As a homicide detective, I have seen many scenes of death. But this is the one I relive over and over again." The judge, in handing down the sentence, emphasized that despite the remorse shown, Nehemiah's actions could not be excused or ignored. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 7 years, with the possibility of parole at age 52. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence was read. Some believed the punishment was fair, while others questioned whether he should have been treated as an adult, given his age and emotional state. This trial was not just about punishing a crime, but also about trying to understand how something so horrific could happen within a family. Nehemiah Griego's case still resonates, raising difficult questions. Can justice truly bring relief from such a profound tragedy? Or do cases like this always leave scars that are impossible to erase? Jacob Morgan, a 17-year-old autistic boy, couldn't hold back tears as he heard his sentence. The case, which took place in March 2015, shocked his community. He was accused of starting a fire that took the life of his half-brother Joshua, a baby of just 14 months. The tragedy happened inside the family's home. That day, a fire consumed part of the house, leaving Joshua trapped inside. Jacob, according to witnesses, was seen trying to re-enter the house to save his brother, but was prevented from doing so by worried neighbors who feared he would also be injured. Despite this, the authorities quickly turned their attention to him as the prime suspect. Imagine the impact of this accusation on a teenager with developmental disabilities. How do you deal with a trial of this magnitude, especially when your own family believes you are innocent? During questioning, Jacob confessed to starting the fire. But this confession came after 5 hours of questioning in an off-the-record interview, a detail that would generate much controversy in court. The family insisted that Jacob was under duress and that his confession was inconsistent. They claimed that he had developmental disabilities and could not fully understand what was happening. Investigators presented a wealth of evidence in court. They found that 2 fires had been started inside the house. They also reported that Jacob had a history of being fascinated by fire and had started a smaller fire on the property just 2 weeks earlier. During the trial, prosecutors pointed out that Jacob initially told several versions of how the fire started, but later admitted to intentionally burning a pillow and throwing it near a heat source. But here comes the question: what if Jacob's confession had not been made under duress? Would the trial have turned out differently? The defense, however, presented a different side of the story. Jacob's parents, especially his mother, July Dover, defended their son fervently. In court, July protested the charges and stated that Jacob was incapable of committing such an act with the intent to harm anyone. She described the love he had for Joshua and the scene in which he tried to go back into the burning house to save him. The trial was marked by emotional moments, especially when the defense brought up Jacob's difficulties. He had developmental disabilities, difficulty reading and writing, and, according to the family, he did not fully understand the gravity of his situation. The confession, obtained without recordings or adequate supervision, was one of the points most contested by the defense. Despite this, the court considered the evidence presented by the investigator sufficient to convict him. The judge, when handing down the sentence, highlighted the gravity of the case and the irreparable loss of the life of such a young baby. Jacob, visibly shaken, cried uncontrollably as he heard the verdict. Can you imagine the weight of a sentence like that for someone so young, especially with his disabilities? The community was divided. Some believed the sentence was necessary, given Jacob's history and the evidence from the fire. Others sympathized with the family, arguing that he needed help, not severe punishment. The Jacob Morgan case is a heartbreaking example of how tragedies can be further complicated by emotional factors and complex circumstances. For his family, the pain of losing Joshua is intertwined with the struggle to defend Jacob, in whom they deeply believe. This trial has not provided easy answers. It has left one question open: was justice served, or did Jacob's struggles make him an easy target in the midst of tragedy? Daniel Petrick, a 16-year-old boy, became the center of a tragic and controversial case that raised debates about the impact of video games and the emotional fragility of adolescence. In 2007, after an argument with his parents about the video game he wanted to play, Daniel committed an act of violence that would scar his family forever. It all started years earlier, when Daniel suffered an accident that left spinal injuries and severely limited his mobility. With a lot of free time, he immersed himself in video games, becoming increasingly isolated and obsessed. According to his defense, this constant immersion in the virtual world made it difficult for him to distinguish reality from fiction. The tragedy occurred when his parents, worried about the excessive time he spent playing, decided to restrict his access to video games. Dissatisfied, Daniel found the combination to his father's safe, where a firearm was kept, and used it against his own parents. He shot both of them. His mother succumbed to her injuries and died, while his father survived, despite serious injuries. After the attack, Daniel fled the scene in a van, but was captured by police shortly after. During his arrest, the young man seemed oblivious to the gravity of his actions. However, everything changed in court, where emotions came to the surface. The trial was marked by moments of intense emotion. Daniel was seen crying on several occasions, especially when listening to the testimony of his father, Mark Petrick. Despite being the victim of the attack, Mark asked the court for leniency and stated that he still loved his son. He described Daniel as a young man who had lost his way and did not know how to deal with his emotions. The defense based its argument on Daniel's inability to distinguish reality from fiction due to his obsession with video games. Psychiatrists testified that he suffered from a cognitive disconnection, aggravated by the isolation after the accident. This argument prevented Daniel from facing the death penalty. The prosecutors, however, were firm in highlighting the premeditation of the crime. They presented evidence of how Daniel planned the attack by stealing his father's gun and waiting for the right moment to act. They also reported that Daniel had a history of lying and manipulative behavior, describing him as a young man who struggled to take responsibility for his actions. The most moving moment of the trial came when Daniel's father tearfully declared, "I still love my son, despite everything that happened." His words moved the courtroom, but the judge stressed that family forgiveness could not trump justice. Daniel was ultimately sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 23 years. The judge stated that although the case was tragic, it was necessary to hold him accountable for his actions. The case has sparked intense discussion about the impact of video games and the challenges faced by isolated young people. While some have pointed to video games as a factor, experts have pointed out that emotional trauma, such as Daniel's isolation after the accident, plays a much more significant role in shaping violent behavior. Daniel Petrick's story is a painful reminder of how tragedies can arise from the combination of emotional vulnerability and fateful choices. Although justice has been served, the impact of this case will continue to resonate with both his family and society. Dylan Schumacher, a 16-year-old boy, found himself at the center of an irreparable tragedy when, unable to cope with the situation, he did something unthinkable. He was babysitting his girlfriend's 2 children when, while trying to calm a crying 2-year-old, he made a brutal decision. Schumacher, clearly angry and frustrated, used a pillow to hit the child, trying to make him quiet. However, the resulting violence was fatal. The child lost his life due to the damage caused by the attack. It seems impossible to believe that something like this could happen, doesn't it? How could someone so young lose control in such a way? The case quickly became complex in court. Although the evidence clearly showed the abuse, the prosecution and defense disagreed on the nature of the crime. The main issue was whether Schumacher should be charged with second-degree manslaughter, which would indicate negligence, or second-degree intentional murder, which would involve intent to kill. The defense argued that he had not intended to kill the child, but rather that his anger had driven him to an impulsive act. The prosecution, on the other hand, argued that the act of striking a defenseless child with a pillow could not be considered something without the intent to cause serious harm. During the trial, Schumacher tried to win the jury's sympathy. In a desperate attempt to show remorse, he claimed that he loved the child and his girlfriend. However, his attempt to appear genuine was quickly debunked. A video of an earlier conversation revealed that he thought he could simply cry in front of the jury and that this would make them feel sorry for him. "Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they'll feel sorry for me," he said in a recording that was played in court. But can tears really erase what has been done? Or do they only make us question the sincerity of the person shedding them even more? His attempt to mislead the jury was unsuccessful. Schumacher was tried and convicted of first-degree murder, with the assault charge. He was sentenced to 18 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2031. The court was not swayed by Schumacher's tears, and his apology did not elicit any sympathy from the jury. The case served as a grim reminder of how anger and lack of control can lead to tragedy, and how in some cases even attempts at remorse are not enough to ease the weight of one's actions. Schumacher, with his attempted manipulation, will pay a significant price for his thoughtless actions, but the pain caused to the victim's family will be an irreparable scar. We've reached the end of another video full of shocking and remarkable stories that make us reflect on the complexity of human actions and the devastating impact they can have. From controversial trials to crimes that shook entire communities, each case shows us how the line between choices and consequences can be tenuous and tragic. Now, we want to hear from you. Which of these cases impacted you the most? Share your opinion in the comments and tell us what you think about these stories. Your participation is very important and helps enrich the debate. If you liked this content and believe that stories like these deserve to be discussed, don't forget to leave your like. It's a simple gesture, but it makes all the difference for the channel to continue growing and bringing more content like this. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now to the channel and activate the bell to receive notifications whenever a new video comes out. We have many intriguing and exciting cases planned, and you won't want to miss them. Thank you very much for watching so far. Your support is what motivates us to continue. See you in the next video. See you then.